The storm lashed with unparalleled violence across the surrounding countryside, transforming paths into muddy torrents and bending trees under the fury of the wind. The sky, an almost black grey, seemed to merge with the earth in a chaos of water. In darkness, Elodie Devereux ran, breathless, her soaked petticoats weighing down each of her steps. Behind her, the barking of dogs drew inexorably closer. The 20-year-old woman had only one thought in mind: to flee, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the Valcourt manor. Her torn cloak no longer protected her from the icy rain that streamed down her face, mingling with the tears she could not hold back. In her desperate flight, she stumbled on a route hidden by the darkness, sprawling full length in the mud. A cry of pain escaped her when she tried to stand. Her ankle was causing her excruciating pain. The barking drew closer still. Baron de Valcourt was known for his cruelty, and Elodie knew that if his men caught up with her, her fate would be terrible. A shudder of horror ran through her at the memory of what she had escaped a few hours earlier when the Baron had cornered her in an isolated part of the manor, his intentions, as vile as they were, transparent. Drawing on her last reserves of strength, she stood up and limped to the edge of a wood. The rain now fell in such a thick curtain that she could barely make out the tree trunks a few steps away. Suddenly, a flickering light caught her attention, a light through the branches. A possible refuge? Without further thought, Elodie headed toward this promise of salvation, venturing deeper into the wood. After a few minutes that seemed an eternity to her, she emerged into a small clearing where a hunting lodge stood. The stone and timber building appeared solid and well-maintained, with light filtering through its narrow windows. Elodie hesitated for a moment. Who could be inside? The Valcourt estate stretched for leagues, but she had run so long that she hoped to have passed its boundaries. The prospect of encountering the Baron's accomplices terrified her, but the increasingly close barking of the dogs left her little choice. In one final effort, she rushed toward the lodge door and knocked with the energy of desperation. The seconds ticked by interminable before she heard footsteps inside. The door opened abruptly, revealing the imposing silhouette of a man. "Who goes there?" he asked in a deep voice, holding a lantern that illuminated Elodie's soaked and soiled face. "I beg you, sir," she whispered, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. "Help me! They're pursuing me!" The man stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the gloom. He was tall, dressed with a sober elegance that contrasted with the rustic setting of the lodge. His chiseled features conveyed a natural authority, and his eyes, a dark green, scrutinized Elodie with troubling intensity. In the distance, the barking was heard again. The man glanced over Elodie's shoulder, then without a word stepped aside to let her enter. No sooner had she crossed the threshold than he closed the door and drew the heavy bolts. "Sit down," he ordered, indicating an armchair near the fireplace, where a comforting fire burned. Elodie obeyed, almost collapsing into the armchair. The warmth of the fire made her realize the state she was in, soaked to the bone, covered in mud, shaking with cold and fear. The man placed a screen between her and the door, then went to a sideboard from which he took a carafe and a glass. He poured an amber liquid which he handed to her without a word. "Drink," he said simply. "It will warm you." Elodie hesitated before taking the glass and swallowing a small sip. The cognac burned her throat but spread a welcome warmth throughout her body. She observed the room around her, trying to understand where she had found refuge. The lodge, though modest, did not correspond to the usual image of a hunting shelter. The furniture was of quality. A library occupied an entire wall, and various objects testified to refined taste. It was more the retreat of a gentleman than the simple shelter of a hunter. "Who is pursuing you, mademoiselle?" asked the man, remaining standing at a respectful distance but still imposing. Elodie lowered her eyes to her glass. How to explain her situation without appearing what she was not? a girl of nothing fleeing her legitimate master. For in truth, her position as lady's companion to the Valcourts made her little more than a servant in the eyes of society. "Baron de Valcourt's men, sir," she finally replied, deciding that the truth, or at least part of it, was her best option. "I was in his service, but I had to leave precipitously." The man raised an eyebrow. "Valcourt? I know that man. His reputation precedes him, and it is hardly flattering." He observed her more closely, undoubtedly noting the marks of violence on her wrists, where the Baron had seized her. "Did he dare to lay hands on you?" The question, asked with contained coldness, surprised Elodie. The man seemed genuinely indignant at the idea. "He attempted to take liberties," she murmured, her cheeks burning with shame despite her innocence. "I managed to escape, but he sent his men after me. If I'm recaptured—" She did not finish her sentence, but the man understood perfectly. An expression of disgust crossed his face. "You are safe here," he affirmed. "This lodge is on my lands, not on Valcourt's. His men will not dare enter it." Elodie looked up surprised. "Your lands, sir?" The man gave a slight smile. "Forgive my lack of courtesy. I did not introduce myself. I am Xavier de Montigny, Duke of Rochefort." Elodie felt the blood drain from her face. The Duke of Rochefort, one of the most powerful men in the province, whose lands rivaled the Valcourts in extent. She had just taken refuge with one of the most influential peers of the realm. "Your Grace," she stammered, attempting to rise to make an appropriate curtsy, but her injured ankle gave way beneath her. The Duke caught her before she fell. "Please remain seated. Formalities can wait until you have recovered." His hands on Daz, her shoulders were firm but gentle, so different from the Baron's brutal hands. Elodie sat down again, confused by this contrast and by her own reaction to the Duke's proximity. "Your name, mademoiselle?" he asked, returning to the sideboard. "Elodie Devereux, your Grace." "Devereux?" He turned to her, an indefinable expression on his face. "Of the Devereux family from Lyon?" Surprised that he knew the name, Elodie nodded. "My father was a magistrate in Lyon, but he died 3 years ago. Reversals of fortune compelled me to accept a position as lady's companion to the Valcourts." The Duke seemed to meditate on this information. "I knew your father," he finally said, "an upright man. His disappearance is a great loss to the justice of this province." This unexpected recognition moved Elodie more than she would have thought. The last years had been so hard that she had almost forgotten the time when the Devereux name inspired respect. Closer barking interrupted her thoughts. The dogs had reached the outskirts of the clearing. The Duke went to the window and slightly parted the curtain. "There are 4 of them, with lanterns and dogs," he observed. "Wait here." Elodie lowered her eyes to her glass. How to explain her situation without appearing what she was not, a girl of nothing fleeing her legitimate master? For in truth, her position as lady's companion to the Valcourts made her little more than a servant in the eyes of society. "Baron de Valcourt's men, sir," she finally replied, deciding that the truth, or at least part of it, was her best option. "I was in his service, but I had to leave precipitously." The man raised an eyebrow. "Valcourt? I know that man. His reputation precedes him, and it is hardly flattering." He observed her more closely, undoubtedly noting the marks of violence on her wrists, where the Baron had seized her. "Did he dare to lay hands on you?" The question, asked with contained coldness, surprised Elodie. The man seemed genuinely indignant at the idea. "He attempted to take liberties," she murmured, her cheeks burning with shame despite her innocence. "I managed to escape, but he sent his men after me. If I'm recaptured—" She did not finish her sentence, but the man understood perfectly. An expression of disgust crossed his face. "You are safe here," he affirmed. This lodge is on my lands, not on Valcourt's. His men will not dare enter it. Elodie looked up, surprised. Your lands, sir? The man gave a slight smile. Forgive my lack of courtesy. I did not introduce myself. I am Xavier de Montigny, Duke of Rochefort. Elodie felt the blood drain from her face. The Duke of Rochefort, one of the most powerful men in the province, whose lands rivaled the Valcourts in extent. She had just taken refuge with one of the most influential peers of the realm. Your Grace, she stammered, attempting to rise to make an appropriate curtsy, but her injured ankle gave way beneath her. The Duke caught her before she fell. Please remain seated. Formalities can wait until you have recovered. His hands on her shoulders were firm but gentle, so different from the Baron's brutal hands. Elodie sat down again, confused by this contrast and by her own reaction to the Duke's proximity. Your name, mademoiselle? He asked, returning to the sideboard. Elodie Devereux, your Grace? Devereux? He turned to her, an indefinable expression on his face. Of the Devereux family from Lyon. Surprised that he knew the name, Elodie nodded. My father was a magistrate in Lyon, but he died 3 years ago. Reversals of fortune compelled me to accept a position as lady's companion to the Valcourts. The Duke seemed to meditate on this information. I knew your father, he finally said, an upright man. His disappearance is a great loss to the justice of this province. This unexpected recognition moved Elodie more than she would have thought. The last years had been so hard that she had almost forgotten the time when the Devereux name inspired respect. Closer barking interrupted her thoughts. The dogs had reached the outskirts of the clearing. The Duke went to the window and slightly parted the curtain. There are 4 of them, with lanterns and dogs, he observed. Wait here. To Elodie's great surprise, he headed for the door, opened it, and went out into the storm. She rose despite her pain and moved closer to the window, worried. Through the curtain of rain, she made out the Duke calmly advancing toward Valcourt's men. Even in the downpour, his stature and bearing commanded respect. She could not hear what was being said, but she saw the men stop short upon recognizing the Duke. One of them, probably the leader of the group, bowed deeply. A brief conversation followed, during which the Duke pointed in several directions with his arm, as if indicating where they should continue their search. Far from the lodge. A few moments later, the men withdrew with their dogs, plunging back into the forest, but in a direction opposite to the lodge. The Duke remained motionless in the rain until they had disappeared, then returned with long strides toward the building. When he came back in, he was soaked, but appeared satisfied. They are convinced that you continued eastward, he explained, removing his dripping coat. They won't return any time soon. You deliberately sent them in the wrong direction, Elodie marveled. But why take this risk for me? You don't know me. The Duke looked at her for a long time before answering. I knew your father, as I told you, and then he broke off, seeming to search for words. Let's say I have my reasons for not appreciating Baron de Valcourt's methods. Protecting an innocent from his clutches is a personal satisfaction. Something in his voice suggested a more complex story, a grudge perhaps, but Elodie did not dare question him further. She was already sufficiently indebted to this man who had saved her from a terrible fate. Thank you, Your Grace, she said simply, putting into those few words all the gratitude she felt. The Duke nodded slightly, then approached to examine her injured ankle. You won't be able to travel tonight, nor even tomorrow, probably. The storm is raging and your injury needs care. I don't want to abuse your hospitality. This is not a question of hospitality, Mademoiselle Devereux, but of common sense. His tone brooked no reply. You will stay here until your ankle is healed, and I have arranged a safe means to conduct you where you wish to go. Elodie looked at him with astonishment. This man, this powerful duke who owed her nothing, offered to protect her and help her without asking anything in return. It was so far from what she had known in recent years that she could hardly believe it. "You are too generous, Your Grace," she murmured. "Not at all. I'm simply doing what any man of honor would do." He headed for a door at the back of the room. "There is a small chamber here. It is modest, but you will be safe there. I will fetch you dry clothes." Before she could respond, he had disappeared into another room, leaving her alone with her tumultuous thoughts. How could her life have shifted so rapidly? That very morning she had been a simple, ill-treated lady's companion at the Valcourts, and now she found herself under the protection of a duke in an isolated lodge in the midst of a storm. Destiny had strange ways of upending an existence, she mused, contemplating the dancing flames in the hearth. She did not know what the future held for her, but for the first time in a long time, a glimmer of hope shone in the darkness of her life. Dawn rose timidly over the forest, still streaming with rain. The storm had calmed during the night, giving way to an almost supernatural silence, only troubled by the song of birds reclaiming their territory. In the small chamber of the hunting lodge, Elodie awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by this unknown place. Then the memories of the previous day came back to her, her desperate flight, the Baron's men on her heels, and this unexpected refuge with the Duke of Rochefort. She sat up in the narrow but comfortable bed, wincing when her injured ankle reminded her of its existence. The Duke had bandaged her sprain with surprising competence, after providing her with a nightgown, far too large, but clean and dry. Her soiled clothes had been taken away, and she wondered with a touch of anxiety what she was going to wear that day. As if in response to this unspoken question, a light knock came at the chamber door. "Mademoiselle Devereux? Are you awake?" The Duke's voice reached her, muffled by the thickness of the wood. "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, instinctively pulling the covers up to her chin. "I have left some clothes outside your door. They belong to my sister and should suit you. Join me in the main room when you are ready. Lunch awaits us." Elodie heard his footsteps recede. She waited a few moments before cautiously rising. Her ankle pained her less, but she would have to take care of it for a few more days. She opened the door slightly, and indeed found a carefully folded package. It contained a simple but elegant dress of lavender blue, undergarments, stockings, and even shoes in her size. How had the Duke been able to procure all this in so little time and in the middle of the countryside? She dressed carefully, grateful for this attire, which, without being luxurious, was of much better quality than anything she had been able to wear during her years with the Valcourts. The dress fit her surprisingly well, as if it had been adjusted for her. After braiding her long brown hair in a simple plait, Elodie emerged from the chamber, leaning slightly against the wall to spare her ankle. The Duke stood by the window, contemplating the forest that stretched before the lodge. In the morning light, Elodie could finally see him well for the first time. He must have been about 30, his aristocratic features bearing the marks of an intense life, a few fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a crease of concentration between his brows. His black hair was cut short, without powder or flourish, and his attire, though of exceptional quality, was of a sobriety that contrasted with the extravagant fashions of the time. He turned at her entrance, and his green gaze detailed her with an attention that made her blush despite herself. "The dress suits you perfectly," he commented. "I am delighted. Come sit down, your ankle needs rest." He indicated the table where a simple but copious meal was served: fresh bread, cheeses, fruits, and a steaming teapot. Elodie sat down, conscious of the strangeness of the situation. Finding herself lunching tête-à-tête with a duke was not a situation she could have imagined even the day before. "How were you able to procure these clothes so quickly?" she could not help asking as he took his place opposite her. An enigmatic smile brushed the Duke's lips. My valet came by at dawn. He brought these items from the main chateau, which is only a league from here. Your chateau is so near. I thought we were at the outer limits of your lands. This lodge indeed marks the boundary of my domain with that of the Valcourts. I come here sometimes to think in peace. There was something in his voice, a nuance of melancholy perhaps, that intrigued Elodie. This man was a mystery in many respects. Why would a powerful duke isolate himself in a hunting lodge? And why was he taking such care of a stranger who had burst into his retreat? May I ask how you recognized my father's name? She timidly questioned, accepting the cup of tea he offered her. The Duke seemed to weigh his answer before speaking. I had occasion to meet him several times during legal affairs. His integrity impressed me at a time when that quality was becoming rare among men of law. Elodie felt pride warm her heart. It had been so long since anyone had spoken of her father with respect. He lost everything because of that integrity, she murmured. He refused to bend before the powerful who wanted to use him. His enemies ruined him progressively, removing his functions, sullying his reputation. I know, the Duke interrupted gently. I followed the affair from a distance. His disgrace was orchestrated by corrupt men who feared he would reveal their malpractices. Elodie looked at him with surprise. You seem to know a lot, Your Grace. I have my sources, he replied evasively, which leads me to wonder. How did the daughter of a respected magistrate find herself as a lady's companion to a man like Baron de Valcourt? The young woman lowered her eyes to her plate, her throat suddenly tight. After my father's death, I discovered that he had contracted substantial debts to finance the lawsuits that were constantly brought against him. Our house, our possessions, everything had to be sold. My mother had already been dead for a long time. I had no family to turn to. She caught her breath before continuing. An acquaintance recommended me to the Baroness de Valcourt, who was looking for an educated lady's companion. The position seemed suitable, and I was in a situation of necessity. I did not have the luxury of choosing. And how did Valcourt treat you? The Duke's tone had hardened, as if he already knew the answer. Elodie hesitated. Speaking of the humiliations suffered was difficult for her, but something in this man's gaze encouraged her to the truth. At first, everything was acceptable. The Baroness is a sickly woman, but not cruel. Then she had to leave for a cure in the south 2 months ago, leaving me alone at the manor. It was then that the Baron changed his attitude toward me. Her hands trembled slightly around her cup. First, small familiarities, inappropriate comments. I tried to avoid him as much as possible. Then, yesterday evening, he trapped me in the library and attempted to... Her voice choked. You don't need to continue, said the Duke, a cold anger now inhabiting his eyes. I know Valcourt's habits with women he considers at his mercy. There was in his voice a personal bitterness that Elodie could not fail to notice. You seem to have a particular history with the Baron, she observed cautiously. The Duke considered her for a long moment, as if evaluating what he could confide in her. Finally, he pushed away his plate and rose, heading for the window. Baron de Valcourt and I have a long-standing dispute, he said, his gaze lost toward the horizon. 6 years ago, my younger sister Emily worked as a governess at the Valcourts, charged with the education of their daughter. He broke off, and Elodie saw his fists clench. Emily was beautiful and innocent. Valcourt saw in her an easy prey. One evening he forced her... His voice died away, but the rest was easy to guess. Elodie felt her heart tighten at the thought of this young woman's fate. What happened to her? She asked softly. She fled, like you. But unlike you, she found no one to help her. Her body was found in the river 3 days later. The brutality of the revelation froze Elodie. She Drowned, yes. Suicide or accident, no one will ever know. Her honor was destroyed, her life ruined. At the time I was in Paris on business. By the time I learned the news and returned, it was too late. The Duke turned back to her, and Elodie was struck by the contained pain in his gaze. I wanted to challenge Valcourt to a duel, but the Baroness, who was unaware of her husband's actions, pleaded for him. And then there was their daughter, also innocent in this affair. I had to swallow my vengeance. "I'm sorry," whispered Elodie, suddenly understanding why he had helped her so spontaneously. "That's why you rescued me. You couldn't save your sister, so I saw in you a chance to repair, in a way, my past failure," he finished with a disarming honesty. "Selfish, isn't it? Even my apparently altruistic acts are tinged with self-interest." "No," protested Elodie with a vehemence that surprised even herself. "It's not selfish to want to prevent another woman from suffering your sister's fate. It's honor, decency." The Duke regarded her with an indefinable expression between surprise and gratitude. "You are generous in your judgment, Mademoiselle Devereux. I'm only acknowledging the truth. You saved me when nothing obliged you to. Regardless of your motivations, the result is the same. Without you, I would now be—" She shuddered at the thought. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with a strange intimacy born of these shared confidences. Elodie realized that despite their differences in rank, they were linked by similar experiences: loss, injustice, the struggle to preserve one's dignity in an often cruel world. "What will you do now?" the Duke finally asked, returning to sit opposite her. "You obviously cannot return to Valcourt." The question brutally brought her back to the practical realities of her situation. In truth, Elodie had nowhere to go. Without money, without family, her options were dramatically limited. I don't know," she admitted with desperate honesty. "Perhaps I could find a similar position in another house, although without references." "That won't be necessary," the Duke interrupted. "I have a proposition to make to you." Elodie tensed despite herself. Even coming from this man who had shown himself so honorable, the idea of a proposition awakened in her an instinctive mistrust. The Duke seemed to perceive her concern, for he hastened to add, "Nothing that could compromise your reputation, I assure you. In fact, quite the opposite." He hesitated a moment before continuing. "My aunt, the Countess de Montigny, is currently seeking a lady's companion. She is elderly but alert of mind, and above all, she is a benevolent woman. Her last companion, recently married, leaving the position vacant." Elodie looked at him with astonishment. "You would offer me a position in your own family. Why not? You are educated, well-born, despite your reversals of fortune, and I have no doubt you would be perfect for the role. But you don't know me. How can you trust me like this?" The Duke smiled, a real smile that softened his austere features. "I flatter myself on being a good judge of character, mademoiselle. And then, you are the daughter of Etienne Devereux. That would almost be enough to recommend you in my eyes." He rose and approached her. "Accept. My aunt lives at the chateau, under my protection. You will be safe there, treated with respect and suitably remunerated." The proposition was so unexpected, so providential, that Elodie wondered for a moment if she were not dreaming. To pass from the status of pursued fugitive to that of lady's companion in a duke's household in the space of one night. It's too generous, Your Grace. I don't know how to thank you. By accepting, simply, and by calling it justice rather than generosity. After what you have been through, you deserve a new start." Moved to tears, Elodie could only nod in acceptance. What had begun as the most terrifying night of her life was transforming into a promise of a future she no longer dared hope for. The Duke approached the fireplace and pulled a cord. "Good. In that case, I will have our departure for the chateau prepared. Does your ankle allow you to travel by carriage? Yes, I think so, affirmed Elodie, still dazed by this reversal of fortune. Perfect. My valet will return with a closed carriage. We will take detours to avoid the Valcourt lands. A troubling detail suddenly crossed Elodie's mind. Your Grace, won't the Baron look for me if he learns that I am under your protection? The Duke's face darkened. Valcourt will not dare defy me openly. Our dispute is known, but his political influence depends too much on the opinion of his peers. To attack a young woman under the protection of the Duke of Rochefort would constitute social suicide. He approached her, his expression suddenly intense. I promise you this, Mademoiselle Devereux. As long as you are under my roof, no harm will come to you. You have my word of honor. The conviction in his voice, the quiet strength that emanated from him, dissipated Elodie's last fears. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. I believe you, Your Grace, she said simply, and I thank you with all my heart. The Duke inclined his head slightly, as if accepting a due rather than a thanks. Then, in an unexpected gesture, he took her hand and placed a light kiss on it, in the manner one greets a lady of high society. It is I who thank you, Elodie Devereux, for giving me the opportunity to finally do justice. This brief but intimate contact gave rise in her to an emotion she could not define, not quite gratitude, not simply admiration, but something deeper that echoed the scars they both shared. Forgive me, my Duke, she murmured impulsively, without even realizing she had used this personal form of address, but I believe it is destiny that brought us together this night. Instead of noting this familiarity, the Duke smiled, a smile imbued with a new warmth. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps some storms, instead of leading us astray, guide us precisely where we need to be. And as the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the hunting lodge with a golden light, Elodie understood that her life had just taken a decisive turn. In her desperate flight, she had found much more than a temporary refuge. She had found a new beginning, a protector, and perhaps, she dared to hope, the start of a story that would transcend their respective wounds. For after all, isn't that how the most beautiful stories begin, with a chance meeting between two souls marked by life, who find in each other an echo of their own sufferings, and the promise of possible peace?